Thank you so much for joining us for a recipe for award-winning online community engagement. I'm Dave Biggs, and I'm going to be moderating today. I'm also going to be starting off the session taking you through what we've learned about best practices for online community engagement before turning it over to our special guests from Syracuse and the town of DeWitt that are going to talk about a very interesting case study that kind of brings a lot of the lessons that I'm going to share to life. So for years, the context that we've been working with in terms of public engagement has been this. We've got a special name for these folks. We call them the STP. They are the same 10 people that show up to everything. And so it seems like oftentimes we're confronted with this, or perhaps this happens, where we've got a whole bunch of people who are angry or fired up about what's going on. So within that context, we were asked, because we've got a lot of experience in online engagement, we were asked by several different agencies to look at a variety of different case studies out there. And we looked at now 225 case studies to try to answer a couple questions. The first one is, how specifically can online tools help in this situation to improve community engagement? And what do the most successful projects have in common? As researchers, in order to answer that question, the first thing that we did is we asked ourselves, well, what does it mean to be successful? So we asked agencies, and now 225 of them so far, a couple of questions. What does it mean to be successful? Well, they talked to us about a couple of things. The quantity of engagement. They talked about needing to engage more people, but not just volumes of people from a broader demographic than were showing up to other forms of community engagement. So broadening the demographic and engaging more people. Then there was kind of information about the quality of information. It really matters that you're engaging people and collecting informed input. So input that you can put some stock in, that you can put some faith in, the information coming in is valuable, but also actionable. So, we talked to a lot of agencies that maybe had success with online engagement, but collected a whole bunch of open-ended comments, and they didn't really know how to summarize the open-ended comments. So it was difficult for them to summarize them in their planning documents. So creating input that's actionable, that you can summarize in terms of graphs and maps and that sort of thing in a visual way. Out of this research, 7 lessons really emerged. Now, don't feel the need to take notes during this webinar. There will be a recording of the webinar that will be available to you after, as well as a guidebook that we've created that summarizes a lot of these lessons and actually goes into more detail. The first lesson that I want to highlight is the importance of designing for what we call the unmotivated. People's attitudes are all over the map, as you well know. There are going to be people who are positive on any particular project you're working on, and people who are negative. And it really affects their level of motivation for what kind of hoops they will jump through in order to participate. It turns out that the most motivated people are typically motivated by either anger or fear. The people who are least motivated are actually kind of in the middle, but actually maybe leaning towards the positive, because those people are relatively satisfied with what's going on and don't feel the burning need to come and participate. It's a shame, because those people could be some of your most constructive and useful people to engage. It's almost like trying to coax a squirrel to eat out of your hand. You don't want to do any big motions to scare them off. Number 2, and that feeds into this one, we found that aiming for about a 5-minute experience is about the golden level. Anything more than that, and you can see that the participation drops off dramatically. Anything less than that, and you don't actually get a huge benefit. So about 5 minutes, it seems to be about the optimal amount of time to ask people for. Number 3, do not require registration. So there's a lot of online engagement software out there. If you can avoid systems that require you to register, you're going to see a huge bump in the amount of people who are participating. Typically, 1 out of 10 people, when confronted with a registration page, will actually get through it. And 9 out of 10 of them will go the other direction. And I'm sure you've all done this as well. When you are asked to sign up for something, you think really hard about, really, do I want to do this? Number 4 is online engagement comes in a variety of different forms, and it's really useful to think about the different ways that you can leverage it to broaden the engagement. Web-based engagement and smartphone engagement are absolutely critical, as you can well imagine. Some of our projects, over 50% of people are using smartphones to access it. So your software should be not just usable on a smartphone, but kind of delightful on a smartphone. We've also had a great deal of success working with kiosks, putting them in community centers or recreation centers so people can just kind of stumble upon them. And we've found that in the right location, we can engage about 200 to 500 people per day with a single kiosk. And then there's a variety of other ways of kind of going to the people, bringing some tablets to a community meeting, and I'll show some examples of that. And of course, making your workshops a little bit more engaging as well. There's all kinds of ways of doing that. On this theme of making it delightful, we've found that there's a couple of criteria that we like to use: insightful and delightful. We're trying to create experiences that are learning experiences, so people can actually consider alternatives, learn about trade-offs and so forth before they participate. So we're trying to pack a bunch of learning into the experience, but also make it kind of delightful and fun to use, so people will participate. Now, this session isn't specifically about MetroQuest, and so I just want to show a few examples to show you how we're kind of taking these messages to heart with some examples. And I'm going to start with the one from our special guest today in Elevating Erie. So here is the configuration that people would see when they start, and you can see that there's just a welcome page that asks people to learn a little bit about the project and simply begin. The first question, and why I really like this configuration, is it starts with a great question. This is one of the most engaging ways to start any kind of conversation with the public. What are your priorities? That's a really good way of saying we're open to hearing what you think about alternatives. So here we can go in here and simply create a rank order list of our top priorities. Very, very simple, but also collect some very rich information. The next step here is on those top priorities, those 5 that I've just ranked. We're asking a couple of simple questions to engage people in a little bit deeper conversation about the amenities and activities and uses for those priorities. And the next step is a visual preference survey that I think is just delightful. It's really fun to look at. It gives people different concepts of, for example, boulevards. I like this one. And you can cycle through them. I really like this one, and so forth. And different concepts of blocks or branching, and a whole bunch of different concepts here which people can weigh into in a very easy way, but also quite nice to look at. And then the last step is a wrap-up step, asking people a few demographic questions. It's interesting. Remember I said don't require people to sign up? They will actually put their information here because they are now engaged in the process. They're curious about the results. They want to be the first to receive them. So they will actually provide this information 5 minutes after they begin. But if you ask for this information up front as a requirement to begin, then it becomes a real impediment. So, putting the questions in the right order is very, very important. So let me show you a few other examples before moving on to the last few best practices. This example, the reason that I picked this one is I thought this particular step was very interesting. It's a transit study for Central Ohio, and I really like this screen that they use for this project. It asks people to look at different potential investments in the transit system, and as they cycle through them, they can see a little bit about the particular route that they're considering investing in, and people can vote on which ones they think ought to be improved. And you can see it's keeping track here. This could be in terms of dollars, so you could actually attach a budget to it, or a number of routes that can be approved. So giving people some constraints to consider along the way. So I thought that was a really interesting screen in Central Ohio. This project here, the Pennsylvania DOT, the reason I really enjoyed this configuration was this step in particular, which allows people a fairly limited budget, and it invites them to allocate this budget to a variety of different areas. And so they're kind of, they're learning about what the different levels of investment, and their priorities should be, but they're also learning about constraints because maybe there isn't enough coins to go around. So I thought that was a really interesting step. And this one here was just a runaway success. This they invited people to identify on a map of Pennsylvania any particular issues or priorities that they have around the transportation system. So for example, here people could go in and say, what we need right here is a bike lane. And then they could submit that, and I can't remember the number. It was well into the maybe 20 or 30,000 markers that were collected on this map. So a vast array of information, and then they could look at them in GIS and see how they clustered in different topics and different categories. So very, very powerful and quite fun as well. And this last one, I think this one did a really great job of helping people understand trade-offs. So the first step was setting your priorities, and here we're looking at different planning scenarios for the region, and you can see the what's getting worse, what's getting better under particular scenarios before you're voting on it. So here, if we look at this scenario does well on my top 4 out of my top 5 priorities and poorly on 1. So then when you collect people's votes on that, that they've assessed and they are aware of some of the pros and cons of different alternatives. So I thought those were some really nice examples, and I'm going to cycle back now and just finish off with a few other best practices before I turn it over to our guests. So number 6, taking a page out of Don Draper's playbook, we now know that you have about 5 seconds to get somebody's attention online. So if you're creating a Facebook post or a tweet or any sort of advertisement, you've got a very short period of time to get their attention. And then if you get their attention and they actually click on it, then you get about 5 minutes of their time. And really, it's really important to use those 5 minutes as effectively as you can to collect that informed feedback that we were talking about. And then if you treat them well and they have a great experience there, it's relevant to their priorities, it's relevant to their lives, they had fun, it wasn't too long, then they'll tell 50 friends. And that's how something goes from a small group of people participating to a very large one. So this is a great example. I love this one. This is a project that we worked on in Nashville, and they just had a great campaign to get that 5 seconds right. They created a "All right, Nashville, it's time to pick." They were picking the future of Nashville, and so they played off that, and so they created these little cards that people were just curious about. They loved them, they shared them, and they clicked on them. And this next one is the one that just made it go through the roof. All right, Nashville, it's time to click. This one all of a sudden was everywhere on Facebook and Twitter, and all of a sudden we saw the participation just spike. So The last one that I'll talk about is the need to monitor and adjust as needed. You're going to have in your mind a demographic reach that you want to have, a number of people engaged, but also the types of people that you want to engage, or maybe the zip codes or whatever your criteria are. It's important to leave some space for creativity during your engagement process, so you can monitor online using the software who you're hearing from and who you're not hearing from, so you can use some techniques to engage people face to face. Use some boots on the ground effort to fill in the gaps, as opposed to getting the people that have already participated. So those are some quick lessons learned that we gained when we were reviewing some of the best case studies that we could find. Again, I'll provide a link to the software guide, so you don't need to scribble things down. Before I turn it over to our special guest, I just wanted to highlight one case study that really jumped out at me recently as being exceptional. Atlanta did a project where they used online engagement to engage their community in their future growth vision. They did some interesting things, such as the Share Kit. The Share Kit it's a 3-page Word document that they provided to key bloggers and agency leaders, community group leaders, with sample Facebook posts, sample tweets about the project, and even a couple of different links of blog posts that people could just cut and paste, add some images that they provided in the document, and maybe change a few words to suit their own agency or community group, and fire it off. This was so successful at helping other people recommend that people participate, because the voice is all of a sudden coming from 100 different directions. Very, very successful, just making it easy for people to share it for you. As a result of that, the news picked it up because they saw people blogging about it, and they invited people from the project team on the news. These people are looking for stories like this all the time, and it's really important to try to gain their attention, because as soon as this aired on the 6 o'clock and the 11 o'clock news, the participation again just spiked. They also did a really good job of monitoring who they were hearing from and adjusting their face-to-face strategies. So they took some laptops and some tablets to community events that were being held in areas that were maybe a little underrepresented online, and they really achieved quite a great cross-representation of the community. They also used a whole variety of different kind of pop-up techniques to get people to put dots on a board or write ideas on a sign and so forth, and so the last thing that I want to highlight from this case study is the engagement process doesn't necessarily end when you've got your information from the community. It ends when you tell the community back what you've heard and how their input has influenced the outcome. That kind of creates a culture of engagement. You're rewarding people for participating, and it's really good to kind of build that culture and tell people, here's what we heard and here's how it's affecting where we're going in the future, so people will feel rewarded for participating. In all, in this project, they engaged over 25,000 people, and I think it was just a huge success because not only of the online engagement, but the ways that they developed the engagement process to sort of work as a bundle. So with that overview and those best practices, I'm going to now turn it over to Sam Gordon and Owen Kearney. Sam is at the town of DeWitt, and Owen Kearney is at Syracuse Onondaga County Planning Agency, and they're going to talk about elevating Erie, which I think is just a wonderful case study. So stand by for those.
Thanks, Dave, for the introduction of our project. I'm really pleased to be able to share an overview of the Elevating Erie project. I'm Sam Gordon, Director of Planning and Zoning with the town of DeWitt, and I'm here with Owen Kearney from the city of Syracuse. And we're going to provide you with an overview of a collaborative project between the town and the city that's focused on the long-term reimagining of an important historical corridor within our region. I imagine most of you are familiar in some fashion with the history of the Erie Canal, and it's perhaps one of the most important public infrastructure investments in the history of North America. The canal spanned the upstate New York cities of Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo, and connected the Great Lakes system to the Hudson River in New York City. The corridor itself has been designated a National Heritage Corridor, and for many decades, the state of New York and the New York State Canal Corporation have been working on the completion of the Erie Canalway Trail System. When complete, the trail system will extend from Albany to Buffalo, and at 360-plus miles, will become the longest continuous bicycle and pedestrian trail in North America. There are multiple gaps in that system, and while not the longest, the 14-mile gap through central New York is arguably the most difficult to close. Our regional MPO, the Syracuse Metropolitan Transportation Council, recently completed a study focused on closing the gap within central New York that extends approximately 14 miles between Camillus, New York on the west, and the town of DeWitt on the east. And it travels through the city of Syracuse, which is in the middle here. Onondaga County, in cooperation with the New York State Fair, the Onondaga Lake Cleanup Project, the city of Syracuse, and other partners, has been working on addressing the gap in central New York by connecting a series of trail systems, including the Onondaga Loop to Lake Trail, the Onondaga Creek Walk, and now the Erie Boulevard East Corridor. This is what Erie Boulevard East looks like today. It's an auto-centric 6-lane separated boulevard with commercial strip shopping destinations that connects the city of Syracuse to the town of DeWitt. Bicycle and pedestrian accommodations are lacking or non-existent altogether, and it has very low visual or aesthetic quality and no reference to the important history of the corridor. This is where our project has come in. We've sought to spark a community discussion about the importance of the history of the corridor, as well as to begin to think about what potential the corridor might have and how we can incorporate the state-level interest in closing the gap in the Canalway Trail System. This is not a discussion that was currently ongoing in the community. We sought to jumpstart that discussion through the hosting of an international ideas competition that would establish a framework for how to envision the corridor, how that corridor could be both restorative and transformative for the community and region. A similar discussion began in New York City decades ago that preceded the creation of the High Line. We began by marketing the competition through a variety of channels, including sending a poster out to design schools across North America. We purchased digital advertising through competition clearinghouses such as Bustler. And we asked respondents to the competition to envision the corridor through the following lens. How would you stimulate a healthy urban corridor? How would you enhance biodiversity and create habitat? What opportunities were there to establish recreation? How do we promote economic growth? And how can we develop multimodal connectivity along the corridor? Submissions were focused on 4 sites along the boulevard, including the entire 4-mile stretch between DeWitt and Syracuse, a segment called The Block, which was a typical block within the city of Syracuse, a branch site which has a remnant of the old Erie Canal, and the bridge site, which actually spans over an interstate highway. So we put out our call, and we had to kind of sit back and wait for what would roll in, and we got lots of ideas. We, in fact, received nearly 70 proposals from 16 different countries. As we had hoped, we received all kinds of ideas that could form the basis for a community discussion about what could be possible along the canal corridor. We asked a distinguished jury to review the submissions that was made up of local business owners, national design experts, local elected officials, academics, and others. Winners were selected and displayed through our competition website, which I'll talk about more in a couple minutes. We developed a public exhibition that was presented at the Erie Canal Museum in downtown Syracuse, which is one of our partners. And all of the competition entries were incorporated into the exhibition. And we also incorporated the MetroQuest survey tool into that exhibition. So people could go walk around, look through all of the ideas and concepts that came in, and then share their ideas about those or their reactions to those ideas and concepts. The survey tool was a critical component in soliciting feedback from the public on the design ideas that we received, and really is going to help us to determine future priorities for the corridor. And it also served to get people excited about the future and to feel that they were part of that process. We did other creative things. We purchased a series of billboards along Erie Boulevard itself to encourage people to share their ideas, hopefully not while they were driving. We carefully cultivated local media to help to tell our story, why we were doing what we were doing and what we were hoping to achieve. And we did receive considerable coverage and a positive response in the local media. And that was all good and positive. But as we were paying attention to the results that were coming in on the back end of the MetroQuest tool, we noticed that there was really quite a lull here after our initial push and outreach. At that same time, it just so happens that I participated on a call not unlike this webinar that we're participating in now, and heard another case study from a place called Abbotsford that provided some insights into what we needed to do to continue our success. And here are actually some of my notes from that webinar, and many of the things that I wrote down are things that we incorporated and have contributed to our success as we move forward. We held a series of pop-up meeting sessions like this one shown at the regional farmers market, which was actually one of the most successful engagement days that we had. It was kind of an unexpected audience who realized that they could sit down for just a few minutes at a computer and contribute their ideas to the future of the Erie Canal. We also had them share their big ideas on sheets of paper that we hung for others to read and inspire them and get them curious about what we were doing. We reached out to a variety of community organizations to speak as part of their ongoing speaker series, including a Green Advocates group, a community visioning group, presentations at Rotary clubs, and we were also solicited by what we thought was a pretty unlikely group, that was the Hiscock Legal Aid Society, who wanted us to speak about our project at their annual meeting. This gentleman actually is using one of our stickers as his pocket square, which we thought was creative. Early on in the project, we launched a website, which is elevatingerie.com, as a place to host all of the competition information. We utilized Squarespace to create the platform. It was really easy to use and we felt looked great. But we realized that we needed to transition the website into a platform to keep the project moving forward, as this was going to also be the landing place for the MetroQuest survey tool. So we did some things. We incorporated social media into the site. We set up a blog, and as I stated earlier, we hosted all of the design submissions to the initial competition on the site. It was also a place for frequently asked questions and a place to showcase all of the media attention, ongoing media attention that we've received. We developed an e-news function from the Elevating Erie blog and established a weekly e-news distribution. We used MailChimp to set this up. Again, it was easy to use, free, and looked great. And we were also able, as Dave mentioned earlier, we were able to take all of those emails that we collected through the survey tool and plug them into the e-news so that we could keep people up to date on what was going on with the project. We also worked to reach out to project partners, competition entrants, and other stakeholders to contribute to the blog to keep it interesting and relevant and to take advantage of their audiences. We took out Facebook ads to drive people to the website and to take the survey. Again, this was relatively easy to do, didn't cost a lot, and helped to extend our online reach. We had guest bloggers, which included Jeff Olson, who was one of our jurors. He's also a principal with Alta Planning and Design. They've been a great advocate for our project. Chris McDermott, who is a graduate student in the Harvard School of Design, was one of our competition finalists. And he added blog posts, and there was some subsequent coverage at GSD, which brought a lot of additional attention to the project. And also Ed Griffin, who is actually an owner of a local Fleet Feet sports store. He was a juror for the competition, really a tireless advocate for public investment in bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and including being featured on our blog, he did his own, through their company, their own Facebook posts, blog entries on their own site to help encourage their followers to participate. We did a variety of other fun things. We developed a banner for the Erie Canal Path to encourage participation in the survey, kind of guerrilla marketing. We created stickers, which, as I said before, the gentleman here creatively used as a pocket square. We had large format floor stickers that we purchased and put them out in various places in the region. And we utilized a company called Sticker Mule to do this. A great online resource again, and we feel that the stuff that we created helped to really create buzz for the program. Even my daughters got into the act. Here they are jumping up and down in joy. This in the background says, "Wish you could reach downtown Syracuse from the Erie Canal Trail." We do, and obviously you can see that they were excited to do so. We also developed a series of fun videos that could be posted to the web and shown during events like there's a downtown outdoor movie series. We're just going to share one of our videos.
This would make a great place for ice skating.
Do you still dream about when
I wish I had thought of that.
the world was our playground to claim? Everything seemed like a new gift just waiting for us to share.
So that video, and we developed a couple of those. We actually did that in-house using Adobe Photoshop and actually my voice and an intern's voice that we had working here. So we had some fun with that and got a lot of additional interest and attention as that kind of spread. So at the end of the day, all of this kind of work that we did led to over 1,200 participants in the survey tool over a 3-month period, which was approximately $10 per participant. And we want to share just some thoughts on kind of what we learned through this process. One was, we had this online tool, which we were very excited about, but we realized we couldn't forget about some of the traditional mechanisms that we had for reaching out to people. So in addition to going to places where people already are, the town had an e-newsletter that goes out to our recreation program. About 10,000 people were on that list, so we sent an email blast out to them and saw really a huge spike in the participation over the course of a couple days after that email went out. And that's one of the great things about this tool is you can see in real time the impacts of the actions that you're taking to encourage participation. We also piggybacked on a lot of sort of related programs or events where we thought there would be like-minded audiences, so different bike tours and bike rides that were happening in and around the region, the downtown movie series, as I said, with the video that we created, the farmers market and other places. We learned, as Dave said earlier, not to underestimate the reach of traditional media. Owen and I were on a local talk show called Bridge Street, and that was another, after we were on that show, the good-looking guys that we are, we saw a huge spike in participation after that. We also did radio talk shows, and as I said earlier, had some articles in local newspapers. We also feel that being creative with our outreach materials and kind of promotional tools that we had, that's really one of the things that helped to sort of set the stage for our project, helped to develop our brand, and helped to kind of continue to generate buzz around the project without breaking the bank. We didn't spend a fortune on developing these things. We also learned we really need to be strategic about our outreach strategy, and remember that even though, for example, we had this online tool and people could participate online, it didn't mean that they would necessarily just do it without some encouragement on our end. So that's where doing the pop-up meetings, doing the speaker series, and other things help to continue to sort of beat the drum and get people to participate. The level of participation that we've had in the survey has really been critical in communicating to decision makers and potential funders the level of interest in the project. We continue to have people come to us and ask us to speak in different places and ask us, kind of what the next steps in our project are so that they can support us in any way that we need. And this really has set the stage for future public participation around this project. So we are planning to incorporate the MetroQuest tool, for example, in future engagement efforts that we'll do as Elevating Erie continues. And lastly, I think one of the things that both Owen and I took away from this is the strength of working together. We developed this partnership across the city and the town. We've received tremendous support from New York State Department of State and a couple of their different funding programs, from our local community foundation. And all of that support has allowed us to do a lot more than we would have been able to do on our own. So really what's next, we have hired a firm to help us to take some next steps in looking at conceptual designs for the corridor. We are in the process of culling through the data that we received from the survey tool, and we'll be presenting a report back out to the public in November of those survey results, and using that in combination with this initial sort of conceptual study and technical analysis of what might be possible along the corridor to solicit additional feedback. And we'll be using that. Once we have that information, we'll be using it to guide our design process and also communicating with funders and decision makers what we heard from the community and how that's important for the final design. And lastly, we're hoping to transform this corridor from its current condition into something that's really worthy of its place in history. So with that, I thank you for your patience again. Thank you for listening, and be happy to answer any questions.
Hello, folks. This is Dave again. Thank you very much, Owen and Sam. That was terrific. The questions have already started rolling in. As expected, people are quite interested. And I'm going to look over here at the chat box and start asking questions. Now, how do we detect ballot stuffing or other abuses in MetroQuest? And so we have, as this person pointed out, methodology and system for detecting and rejecting ballot stuffing in MetroQuest. I can't go into a great bit of detail about it because some of the techniques that we're using are secret because we don't want essentially people to abuse it. But I can tell you that we have been tested a number of times. I mean, as the questioner pointed out, many planning projects are controversial, and so
sometimes people get overzealous and try to do things like vote 500 times for their favorite scenario or whatever it is. So through 3 methods, we detect when such abuses are happening. It's fairly easy to detect them at the first level because typically people will be using the same IP address and will come in repeatedly over and over and over. So through their IP address and the timestamp and the information that they're providing, it becomes a real pattern that's very easy to identify. In all the years that we've been doing this, we can only point to a couple of examples where that has occurred. But it does occur, and it's good to have some safeguards in place in order to stop it from becoming a problem or even just becoming a worry. If that individual would like to contact me individually, I can go into more detail than I can on the webinar.
There is a question here. When you change methodology of engagement in response to lack of participation, how do you maintain consistency so that the comments and input is comparable and can be combined at the end of your feedback session? Well, that's a great question. It is really important to ask the same questions and show the same material in the same situations, but there's some things that you can only do face-to-face. And so there might be additional information or additional kind of discussion that happens face-to-face that doesn't happen online because it's just too awkward. One of the real benefits of face-to-face is people hearing from each other, meeting their neighbors, and hearing different viewpoints, which I think is really quite healthy. But in the end, I think it's important to try to ask each in each of your different platforms the same questions, so you do have that comparable input in the end. There's a lot of background information that can be provided online as well, but when you've got somebody's time face-to-face, you can usually spend quite a bit more time with them looking at different options and considering different alternatives. So I would say it's absolutely something to be aware of, and as much as possible, it's nice to have the comparability. The other strategy, and I'll see if I can include this in the follow-up material, is we've developed a procedure for going from online engagement to face-to-face engagement and back to online engagement. So sort of using them not in parallel, but in series. So engaging people online to collect their priorities, and then engaging people face-to-face, arguably a smaller group of people face-to-face, that were then charged with how do we make sense of these priorities and how do we create options and solutions for these priorities that we've heard from a vast number of people. Why I like that is it takes kind of off the table the opportunity for a few minority voices to show up and determine the priorities for the entire community. And then, once those alternatives and solutions have been created by that smaller group of people face-to-face, going back out and taking those alternatives or scenarios or options, whatever they may be, back out online, has worked successfully for us. Okay, still haven't got it yet here. So we've got another question that has come in. What engagement platform did Atlanta use, or did they create something from scratch? So Atlanta used MetroQuest. I showed, now you can see my screen. Let me just back up. So here's they use MetroQuest actually 3 times during their engagement process. So they engage people on kind of very high level sort of questions about priorities and values and directions, and then they got more and more specific for each phase, changing out the kind of questions and the kind of interactivity in order to engage people in a kind of a process that narrowed down to a final plan.
So, other questions here. As expected, what is the overall budget and funding sources for your project? how much can you share about that?
Owen Kearney here. The funding source was New York State. The state has a variety of different programs that both the city and the town were part of. One was focused on brownfield redevelopment along this corridor that the city received, so we used that funding to support. It was essentially a 50-50 split for the most part. The total project costs. So again, that's the city funded that through a state grant program that paid for a good portion of the design and the MetroQuest work. Really, everything that you're seeing here was developed out of that program. And the town also had a similar funding source focused on local waterfront. And actually, the Erie Canal qualified, the former Erie Canal, and qualified for that program. So the same overall funding source, but two different angles that the city and the town both took. And so that was our funding.
Excellent. I want to let me, just because of the late hour, I just want to cover off some end of session stuff in case people have to take off and have another meeting. I just want to let you know that we will be following up with the recording and the slides from the presentations, as well as the written Q&A for questions that we weren't able to address. I will be sending around later on today a link for those of you who are AICP to receive your credits. And certainly, if you have any other questions, I would be happy to either address them myself or direct them to the appropriate person. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. We do have a few more minutes and several more questions to get to. So Owen and Sam, can you stick around for a few more minutes and address a few more questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, terrific. So folks, if you have to take off, thank you very much for joining us, and we're gonna answer a few more questions here if you have time to stick around. So one of the questions here is, did you provide incentives or rewards for participants? So you had some good collateral there. Were you providing any awards or rewards?
There weren't awards or rewards for the participants in the online survey. I mean, when we were out at public venues or speaking, we did pass out the stickers. I think they were cool enough, maybe considered a reward. But with the ideas competition, there were awards, monetary awards for the winners of that. Each of the winning designs received, their design entries received $1,500. So that helped to encourage participation in the ideas competition.
Right. Oh, interesting. And I think you guys mentioned this a little bit about going out again as Elevating Erie continues. But one of the questions here is, what is your plan to keep the energy going during the implementation and programming and so forth? What are your plans for kind of keeping the conversation going?
Yeah. So that's an ongoing discussion between Owen and myself and some of the other. There's actually, fortuitously, the bicentennial celebration of the beginning of the construction of the Erie Canal begins this coming year in 2017. And Syracuse is hosting the World Canal Conference in September of next year. So there's a lot of things that we're doing around and will be doing around that bicentennial celebration to continue to have a focus on this corridor. We are talking with other public agencies like Onondaga County and the MPO about coordinating our different trail efforts so that we're working together towards closing that gap. We're continuing the blog. Will be when we have the information complete from the survey results, we'll be going back out to the community with those results. hopefully with something as nice looking as Dave showed earlier, to give people that reward for their participation, and so that they know we heard them and are looking forward to addressing their comments as we move forward. In future design phases, we're hoping to incorporate the survey tool so that we can bring those designs back out to people and engage them again. And here's what we've come up with. What do you think? I think the biggest challenge is making sure that the design quality as we move forward, it continues the sort of rich visual tradition that we've started here. And to do that, it's going to require multiple different funding sources.
Right. Very good. Thanks for that. That was a great answer. And the next question, and probably the last question, I apologize for us going over. Folks, thank you very much for sticking with us. We did have that 13-minute kind of dead air in the middle where we had to do some tap dancing. So we went a little bit over, and I appreciate your sticking around. The last question that we're gonna address online here, we will address all of them in the follow-up material, but the last one that we'll talk about online is about the cost per participant. So the Erie project indicated a cost of $10 per participant in engagement. Is there an accepted benchmark for public participation costs? And just since this question came in, I went and I found a slide that was produced by the Nashville team that we were speaking about earlier with those great visual campaigns. They actually had a fairly large budget for their project, and they used a variety of different methods for community engagement. And they actually did the work of costing out how much it costs per participant in all of these different, some of them face-to-face and some of them online. So the events, focus groups, lounges, and community conversations, as well as Book a Planner, were all kind of face-to-face opportunities. Some of them, more like pop-up engagement, which can be more cost-effective than hosting your own event. And then they used a number of different online tools, Text-as-in, Mind Mixer, which is now called My Sidewalk, and MetroQuest, and they calculated the cost per participant. I don't know if there's an accepted kind of benchmark. We're always trying to target $10 or less in terms of costs per participant for MetroQuest. I think that there's a wide range of costs out there for face-to-face as well as for online tools. Some online tools are relatively cost-effective when you look at the overall price, but maybe the participation levels aren't as high as some of the other ones. And so cost per input is, I think, a really nice way of summarizing how much it costs for different engagement. And interestingly, when they presented this slide, the point was not, we should just do online engagement and drop the other face-to-face stuff. They actually made careful note of the fact that you can do different things face-to-face, but just realize that less people will attend and it will cost more. And so they were advising for people to use face-to-face strategically to get at some of those underserved and underreached populations. And do you have any comments that you want to close with, Owen or Sam?
Well, I think just on that, in that vein, we feel that the amount of interest that we've generated and not just in people that participated in the survey, but in decision makers and potential funders, because we saw that over 1,200 people participate in this project in our region. We're focused on a pretty small corridor within the region in the big picture. I think that's really helped us. It has been money well spent because, we're able to have a conversation now with potential funders, include this in grant applications. We have real hard data that shows that people are engaged with this issue and really have some strong opinions about what should happen with the corridor.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's great, and a nice wrap up. As I As I mentioned, folks, we will address all of these questions. I'm going to leave the chat box open for another 10 minutes, so and I won't close the webinar software. So if you think of anything after we hang up, don't hesitate to keep those ideas coming. I think most of you have my email as well. I sent an email earlier, an hour before the session. So if you think of anything in the next few hours, don't hesitate to add questions to that. We will get to all of them in the follow-up material. I want to send out a special thanks to Sam and Owen for participating today. Wonderful job on presenting your case study, and I know that based on the questions, people are really interested in learning more about it. We will include that video that was a little bit hard to hear in your presentation in the follow-up material as well, so people can see that and see the kind of materials that you were sharing to generate so much excitement. And with that, I'm going to thank you folks for attending, and thanks very much to our special guests, and take care.
Thank you, Dave.